I'm Shane Murphy Goldsmith, President and CEO of Liberty Hill Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you to a special episode of our two-time award-winning podcast, Conversations from the Frontlines. In this special Best of Season 4 episode, we're looking back at some exciting moments from our previous season and highlighting powerful conversations with some of our region's most inspiring frontline movement leaders, experts, and provocative authors. Join us as we tackle some of the most challenging social justice issues of the day. Together, we'll go behind the scenes of the fights for social change, the work to build community power, and the push to strengthen solidarity across movements. Now get ready for some frank conversations and real talk on Conversations from the Frontlines. In the first episode of Season 4, I was joined by nationally acclaimed co-authors of the influential book This Is an Uprising and founders of the recently launched Whirlwind Institute, Mark Engler and Paul Engler. In this episode, titled Everyone's Got a Part to Play, Movement Ecology, we took a deep dive into movement ecology and explored the multi-strategy approach for building resilient, diverse movements in times of political hostility.
There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. When I was trained to be a structure-based organizer and a labor union organizer, it takes forever to organize a union in a workplace. I mean, it takes years. And you build leadership very slowly through one-on-one relationships, through one-on-ones. You know, what we're talking about with the moment of the whirlwind is all of a sudden now you have hundreds of thousands of people that if you ask them to do something, they're willing to do it. And people out of the woodwork, not through the pipeline that we're trained to develop people through, like a ladder of engagement, through a structure of organization, which, by the way, is really important for sustaining people for the long term. But all of a sudden, all those rules don't work. There is literally hundreds of people that would go to jail, that would drop out and do crazy stuff. There's hundreds of thousands of people that want to mobilize. And if you look back on history, those moments of these trigger events and moments of the whirlwind, actually a huge portion of everyone that's been organized has not been organized through the traditional structures. They've been organized in these moments where everything changes because you have this huge active support, popular support that comes out. And the rules of organizing change, and you can absorb people into structures like Indivisible. It went from zero, and in 6 months, they have one of the largest bases of people right now doing stuff in resistance, right? But if you don't know how to function in the rules of the moment of the whirlwind, if you don't set up the structures to absorb people and figure out how to engage with the movement, you lose that opportunity. And most people don't even have no clue how powerful those moments are, not just for engaging people. Like most people get radicalized and absorbed into organizations in these moments, outside of the labor movement, outside of these structure-based organizations. But number two, if you look, I mean, we have tons and tons of tracking around this, around major polarization of the public, of how the public actually changes their opinion, whether or not the Overton window is affected about what is appropriate to talk about, how public opinion changes. Almost all of it happens in these moments.
Next, I sat down with Stephanie Luce, nationally acclaimed author, scholar, and professor of labor studies at City University of New York. She discussed Practical Radicals, 7 Strategies to Change the World, the influential book she co-authored with Deepak Bhargava, which explores lessons from movement history, proven strategies for winning change, and the opportunities facing a new generation of progressive activists. Here's a highlight from our conversation from an episode titled, What Does It Mean to Be a Practical Radical? So I remember one part of the book that stuck with me is it talked about how conflicts emerge within organizations and movements and strategies for addressing them. And one of those conflicts is our relationship to power. You know, there are folks who, as your book describes it, sort of focus on taking the most radical kind of principle perspective. And then on the other side, there's folks who are really focused on building power. But on the side of the sort of most radical position, there's an aversion to power because folks have seen the abuse of power. So that leads to movement structures that don't have hierarchy or authority and things like that. And just thinking about when you said, imagine if we were in charge, what would we do? And I'm just thinking about even as somebody who believes deeply in building power and does not have the aversion that many have, when you say that, I suddenly think, well, first of all, I can't imagine it. And oh my God, that's a really big question. And then also, like, is that what we want? I mean, is there something that becomes sort of inherently abusive when power is consolidated in any way? So put a question mark at the end of that sentiment.
Yeah. And that raises so many good questions and partly gets to the title of the book, Practical Radicals, which is this tension that we feel between wanting to have these big, bold ideas of changing the world, fighting for transformational change, but that seeming really utopian and pie in the sky. And the other tendency we have is to really dig into the pragmatism and just fight for what we can win. And that tends to be smaller things. And then we're not really changing the world. Because the system is biased against us, if we're just getting small wins over time, we're going to fall behind. And so we tried to dig into this, like, first of all, why are we so afraid of power? Like you say, it's some for good reason. We've seen a lot of abuse of power. We've seen hierarchical organizations that don't really work well for us, that become bureaucratic or corrupt even, or undemocratic. And then on the other side is like how to really keep dreaming big, but in a way that's not just like we're going to replicate the problems that the other side had. You know, we start with like saying we need to make the space to talk about big vision. It might not be a blueprint. We're not saying like we have all the ideas now, like this is what it's going to look like. It might also just be about the mechanisms. These are mechanisms to deal with conflict that will come up in any democratic society that's functioning well. These are mechanisms to get deep engagement from people or to have deep education. And so it might be just about the vision and values might be what a world like that might look like without a blueprint. That if we don't dream big, we're not going to ever achieve that. And we're also not maybe going to get people inspired to stay part of the movement. Like a lot of research shows, like people might not engage in a fight just for a 2% wage increase, but they might engage in a fight that's about, control of their work-life balance or their workday. Some of it is about that and trying to really dig in, at least get on the same page about why we're afraid of power, why we're suspicious of power, but also the necessity of power, because if we don't engage it, the other side does, right? So it's not like just by avoiding it or ignoring it, it goes away. It just intensifies on the other side.
In episode 3, I sat down with distinguished journalist and labor reporter for In These Times magazine, Hamilton Nolan. With over 20 years of experience in the field, Nolan takes us behind the scenes of the American labor movement and its critical role in our society and politics. Together, in an exciting episode titled, Can the Labor Movement Rescue Democracy?, we discussed the economic justice organizing work that foundations like Liberty Hill fund. But we also talk about something a little bigger. So I want to go to this article now that is really what initially introduced me to you, what progressive funders should be funding. And I love any critiques of philanthropy. So we'll dive in. I'll just read a quote where you say, there are progressive foundations that do fund labor organizing in various ways, but the type of organizing that produces new union members scarcely registers for most major funders. There is not a perfect freestanding organization that sits apart from unions themselves that fulfills this critical task. So tell us more about this critique and what role do you think philanthropy can and should play?
Well, one thing I became really focused on over the years of my work is union density, which is just the percentage of workers who are unionized in America. And just that one statistic alone can tell you so much about the decline of America and the rise of inequality and the decline of power of the working class and all that stuff. I mean, beating down union density and just having less workers be union members has led to so many bad things. And on the flip side, we know, and there's a lot of research that tells us that raising union density and putting more workers into unions has all these great positive effects. Wages go up for union members and for non-union members in the same industry. Their wages go up because the companies have to compete suddenly with these unionized firms. Safety goes up. Health goes up. Like, there's all these great things that happen when you increase union density. And as hard as it is to unionize, what I've seen is that a big barrier, one of the biggest barriers to increasing union organizing on a big scale around America is that there's just not enough resources. union organizers know how to organize unions, but there's just not enough union organizers in enough places. Unions are not spending enough money to do new organizing. And so it became clear to me that like resources are such a big constraint on this extremely, extremely, extremely important factor of getting more people into unions specifically. And what never has really existed is a bridge from philanthropy into union organizing. As you touched on, like foundations do a lot of good work associated to labor and the labor movement. Worker centers are often foundation funded. Think tanks, labor journalism. And obviously, I'm all for that. I mean, all of those things are good causes, but like the central and most powerful tool that we have to achieve improvement in all these factors is union organizing, specifically organizing non-union workers into unions. And we know how to do it, and we do not have the resources to do it at the scale we need. And so, you know, when I came to understand that, I was like, man, if we could build a pipeline of philanthropic money into actual union organizing, that would be such a powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be a great use of funds by philanthropy because, you know, the nature of a union is it's like teach a man to fish type thing. You know, you don't have to fund the union every year for 100 years. You organize people into a union and it's a self-supporting organization. Unions fund themselves. They're funded by dues. So what we need is money just to do the organizing to get the unions created. And once you create the unions, they sustain themselves.
Wow, that's a great point.
Philanthropy is not responsible for funding every union for all time. It's like what we need is to get people into unions. And there's an entire legal structure that gives unions power. There's an entire labor movement they can plug into. So it's really like this very specific task of new union organizing that has an extremely big payoff on the other side, that pays for itself on the other side. And that I think is such a great place for philanthropic money to intervene and get so much bang for their buck. That pipeline has not really been built.
In our episode titled, How Can Philanthropy Help Win the Fight for America's Future?, we heard from David Callahan, founder and editor-in-chief of the independent digital media outlet Inside Philanthropy. Callahan takes us through his analysis of liberal philanthropy and how understanding that shifting power is the key to saving our democracy. Okay, so some other points that you make in this piece have to do with philanthropy not understanding and investing in the right ways in power, understanding that shifting power is the key, investing in organizing and civic engagement, and a sort of technocratic operating model. And I see the way this relates to the economic argument is that if you're really going to challenge the structural forces that create this massive inequality and you're going to fight to shift power, then that's messy and it doesn't necessarily fit into a work plan with quarterly outcomes, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. The tactics are going to be confrontational and aggressive and all these things that do not describe the personality of philanthropy. Can you walk us through your argument around this understanding and focus on power and how that relates to organizing and the economic justice issues?
So in the second part of my article series, the what to do now part, I offer 3 big buckets where I think funders need to invest a lot more. And organizing is one of those, and probably the most important one, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to give people power to improve their lives economically and in other ways. And you're not going to get power unless they're organized and have the ability to come together. And that takes money and it takes time, and it doesn't happen on a 3-year grant cycle. A lot of the organizing groups in America that do a good job have been around for many years, and they've been slowly building up trust and connecting with communities. And this is a long-term play by philanthropy if it's going to be successful. And many funders shy away from that just because it doesn't meet their timelines, and also because it doesn't neatly fit into their issue buckets. A key theme in all my writing lately has been that everything philanthropy wants to do on X, Y, and Z issues lies downstream from politics and who has power. As we're seeing right now, if the wrong people have power, your entire agenda is not only dead in the water, many of the things that you have built over previous years and decades are at risk of being rolled back.
It's interesting because I think about, again, I spend most of my time in a world of philanthropy that is more progressive and doesn't necessarily, they're not the worst actors in all of this, but there is a lot of funding among progressive foundations for power building specifically. When I started at Liberty Hill, nobody was even talking about the word power. And of course, Liberty Hill's always focused on that. But I've definitely seen in the last 10 to 15 years a shift, not just towards racial justice, which is, of course, has been vital, but to power building. But it's still done in this kind of technocratic way that you're saying. In some ways, like even when they figure out that's the key, they're stymied by the operating model, this way that philanthropy operates that I think is just really hard to keep operating that way if you're trying to truly shift power.
A lot of organizing groups have to go out and raise money for project support for work on specific
Right.
issues. So they'll get money for a clean water campaign or an immigration sort of protection campaign, but it's harder to get those general operating support grants that get renewed year after year, which is what these groups need. And that is a key way in which the needs of the organizing world are out of sync with the operating model of philanthropy.
In the first half of the season, we heard from scholars and authors about what it takes to build power, from community organizing to mass protest. In the next stretch, we moved to the front lines, centering the communities most directly under attack, to better understand what's happening and what people power looks like now. In episode 5, titled When a Thriving Community is a Revolutionary Act, I sit down with Bambi Salcedo, President and CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition, a Liberty Hill grantee and the largest trans-led organization in the United States. Together, we dig into the state of the trans liberation movement and the urgent fight against escalating backlash on trans communities. So one of the themes of this season in our podcast is about people power. And of course, Liberty Hill supports community organizing because we believe and we know that the only way to win is with people power. And so I'd love to understand your perspective on what role you think community organizations like yours play in saving and strengthening our democracy.
A lot of times people talk about like reimagining. And I think when we talk about democracy, I think democracy is attached to politics.
Mm-hmm.
We need to really think about the lives of people and leave those out of politics. Leave the lives of people out of politics.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, then we're going to be able to build people power.
Mm.
Because our own government is guilty of keeping people in the margins,
Mm-hmm.
keeping people oppressed, not having the resources that people need. And if people don't have the basics, then we're not going to empower ourselves.
Right.
And so it's part of the system. So if we're going to talk about democracy is mostly tied to politics.
Right.
So personally, I think our democracy is fucked up, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah.
You know? And so, like, if we are able to really understand the importance of taking care of people, right? Like being in community and caring for our community, then that's how you empower people. And not try to just get people to the ballots
Right.
to vote. And so
Your community thriving is a revolutionary act.
for us, you know, I mean, our Sisters Lords said that when a trans woman steps out of their house every day, it's a revolutionary act.
Mm-hmm.
Because we essentially walk with targets on our back, right? Like we are prone to violence at any given moment, right? And that is just our reality.
In the next episode, I dig into how community power and labor power come together to win real change for working families. I'm joined by Victor Sanchez, Executive Director of LANE, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, and Amy Scher, Campaign Director of ACE, Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, for a conversation on how their organizations are harnessing labor power to drive economic justice in the region. So yeah, you both work very closely with labor. I mean, LANE, really, that's kind of the founding idea. ACE has done a ton of work over the years to build those labor alliances. And, you know, in Los Angeles, the Labor Community Alliance, I think, is one of the things we're famous for, and the infrastructure around that. And certainly see the power like the mansion tax and, you know, living wage and other extraordinary victories that can happen when there's those alliances. And of course, there's lots of challenges in working with labor and particular unions, but would love to hear from both of you about how you're working with labor, how you see the role of labor playing out here.
We worked hand in hand. I mean, I feel like the labor movement is such a critical democratic institution that has tremendous power that could, you know, win meaningful changes in the lives of working families more broadly. And I think that's kind of why we partnered with them on multiple campaigns in different sectors of the economies, because we know that growing the labor movement is one of the ways in which we realize this vision that, like, we're building an economy that works for everyone. And so they're bar none, I think, central to like what is needed. And they have tremendous power in this moment that can be leveraged, right, to help make progress on the things that we're trying to win on. So for us, at least, whether it's living wage or even on the Know Your Rights piece, because we partnered a lot with the LA Fed as well as with UFCW 770 to go in and do this stuff at scale. Like the movement is, I mean, the labor movement is partnering is in many different ways to kind of help move the ball forward on a lot of these fights. But I know you all have been engaged with the labor movement with respect to the pension piece and how we can leverage their pensions, right? Because in this moment of corporate power, you know, private equity is very much a part of that too. And so I think you have a lot of examples of labor unions who are getting creative with the type of power, with leveraging the type of power that they do have in this moment to try to shift the conversation and shift the balance of power in different areas.
In the powerful episode, What's at Stake in the Fight for Immigrant Rights, we heard from Arely Hernandez, Director of Executive Affairs at CHIRLA, the Coalition of Humane Immigrant Rights Los Angeles. She unpacks the organization's legacy of advancing immigrant rights, the strategy behind its impact, and the critical role member-led organizations play in responding to escalating federal threats against immigrant communities today.
Many folks talk about CHIRLA being bold, but the boldness is in giving people the dignity that they're asking for, not the limitations that many people think this is what we can get done, so let's be happy with it. No, it's the boldness is people deserve this, and so we're going to fight alongside them for what they're demanding, because that's really the core of it. We're fighting alongside people, not speaking for them, not fighting for them. They're part of this struggle. When we go to Washington, D.C., the members go. They connect. They tell their stories. They say, this is what's happening in my community. This is why you need to pass this bill. When we go to Sacramento, they are saying, this is what we're seeing. This is why we need you to take action. In city council with the mayor, that's what membership-led organization is. The community is connected to the halls of power, to the chairs of power to say, this is what is needed. We need you to take action.
This is what I love about the work, and this is what brings me to the work. When you describe people getting together, making decisions, your staff is accountable to these members. The decisions that drive your organization are made by the people who are directly impacted. They're showing up to speak to Congress. That's democracy to me. Next, we were joined by two powerhouse voices. Organizing legend Marshall Ganz, who helped shape campaigns alongside leaders like Barack Obama, and Joseph Tomas McKellar, Executive Director of PICO California, the state's largest faith-based community organizing network. Together, they unpacked how collective agency, from grassroots organizing to narrative strategy to electoral power, drives real change and strengthens our democracy. Tell us about, in the practice of organizing, in those day-to-day micro interactions, how do you bring out the humanity and not just the individual's humanity, but connect it to the larger we, to the notion of a collective interdependence?
Organizing was always about cultivating courage, looking at a person not as a deficit, but as the resources they have as a human being. You start there, but it's also the case that we're relational creatures. And so we don't exist as isolated individuals. We're in a relationship, like it or not. But so it's then the relational capacity, the connection of me with you and others. Then you begin to develop something so much stronger because then we're with each other. So that you get to the collective. But then you got to get to the power, because if you don't get to the power, you're not going to change anything. To me, the insight about power was that it's not something you have, it's something you create. It's an influence. And it's an influence that's created by interdependence. In other words, we are interdependent with people, institutions in the world. It's about needs and resources. And if you need my resources more than I need yours, who's got the power? Well, turns out it's me. But if I need your resources more than you need mine, then who's got the power? Oh, turns out it's you. In other words, the terms of interdependence is what really matters. And so if we're in a balanced interdependent relationship, we build credit unions, co-ops, collaboration. We build power with one another. But when the resources are held in one place and the needs in another, then it's going to turn into domination, inevitably. And so then the question becomes, how do we reverse that? It's not by starting with our powerlessness. It's starting by resources we do have, not what we don't have.
Next, Trista Harris, world-renowned author and president of Future Good Consultancy, joined us in the studio to delve into the exciting world of future-focused philanthropy and helped us answer the question, how can philanthropy use futurism to change the world? Okay, so what is futurism?
Yeah. Futurism is paying attention to signals that are happening in the present that are telling you what is going to happen in the future. We do a lot of signal tracking and paying attention to trends at Future Good, and we have a framework that we've created called WOW. If something is weird, the opposite of something that's been happening previously, or if it's just straight up wonderful, it's something to pay attention to. So futurism is about developing practices to notice those signals and then make decisions that harnesses those trends to get you to the future that you're most excited about. You bring together people that care deeply about the issue and have multiple angles that they're looking at that issue. Sometimes it's artists, sometimes it's young people, sometimes it's funders, sometimes it's the nonprofits doing that work, sometimes it's people impacted by the problem. And what you have them do is imagine 30 to 50 years in the future, if this effort was fully successful, what does the world look like? What is different when you're walking around outside as a result of that effort? And then at that moment of success, if you turn that lens around to the organization, what would the organization have to look like for that to be true? And what it does very quickly is get people aligned on a shared view of the future. Because I think within most organizations that I talk to, they say, no, we're all doing the same thing. And then you pull them apart and you say, well, what do you think it would look like 50 years from now? And it's a completely different vision from the CEO and the board and the direct staff members. It might be just a little bit different, but that little bit of difference completely transforms the work that you do in this moment. And so getting people aligned on a shared picture of the future means that all of your efforts that you're doing right now are actually pushing in the same direction. And for most of our clients, that 30 to 50-year vision only takes 5 to 7 years to happen. Wow. So you need a long enough runway to envision something different. But once people are aligned on that vision of the future and actually pushing in the same direction and not diffusing the efforts, then suddenly they really create fast, transformative change.
In our season finale, we shook things up a bit. I brought some of my favorite frontline organizers into the studio for a candid deep dive. La Defensa's Yvette Ale Ferlido, Social Justice Learning Institute's Derek Steele, and Pico, California's Jared Rivera. Together, we pressure tested this season's organizing theories against on-the-ground activism and got to the heart of what we can accomplish when we invest in community power.
I think part of the importance in maintaining folks for the long haul is to support individuals that are coming out to a protest, that are activated in a worldwide moment, to help them recognize what their personal stake is in that long-term work. What are the needs that they have? How does that connect to, going back to interdependence, how do their needs connect to other people's needs? How do the resources that are in community, how do they access the resources that they need as well? You don't need to be an immigrant person to care about immigrant rights issues, right? You should be able to have a community space because human beings inherently, we want to be in community. We want to be with other people. We are reliant on each other. Just biologically, genetically, we are predisposed to want to be in community spaces. So part of how we retain people in those whirlwind moments is by providing a community space, a home, a political home where they're able to build relationships, to get some of their needs met, to learn, to collectively learn from each other. That's what keeps people coming back, is having a social network in person, like a real life, a real human social network, and to feel like they can contribute in some material way. You know, back to your point, Derek, that folks want to feel like they're leaving a stamp, a mark, that they're contributing towards something. And that feels good, right? That reinforces those endorphins. Like when you feel like the work that you're doing is making a difference, that makes you want to do it again and again and again, right? But if you feel like the things that you're doing are, you know, you're spinning your wheels, like you're not making friends, you're not making community connections, then you kind of just walk away from that. And so part of being able to absorb folks is to really remember we need to build a community that folks can be a part of, give them tangible things that they can do, help them identify their skills, whether it's their particular skill or a passion or just resources that they have to contribute, and help folks feel good about doing it again. And so part of building that infrastructure is having the organizations to sustain it even outside of those whirlwind moments, right? To keep the doors open so folks that come in, regardless of a whirlwind moment or not.
Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us for this special Best of Season 4 episode. Don't miss all brand new episodes of Conversations from the Front Lines coming this summer. In the meantime, you can revisit all of Seasons 1 through 4 here or on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite episodes with your friends. We'll see you soon for more Conversations from the Front Lines.